A millionaire visited a nursing home to donate and found his mother lost for 50 years. The helicopter touched down smoothly on top of the Montero Tower, headquarters of the Hotel Empire bearing his name. Inside, Lucas Montero was just wrapping up a video conference with investors in Dubai, already wearing his bespoke blazer for the next meeting. It was always like this, a perfectly timed sequence of engagements, flashes and figures. To the world, he was the man who'd turned a rundown regional chain of inns into Latin America's largest luxury hotel conglomerate before he'd even hit 40. The kind of story that sells self-help books and success biographies. But the silence that greeted him after hours was deafening. His penthouse apartment atop the tower was immaculate, clean lines, Italian marble, artworks by up-and-coming artists. Every piece chosen with clinical precision. Nothing there was memory. Nothing felt like home. In the back drawer of his closet, behind rows of color-coordinated suits, he kept an old photograph, yellowed, faded, its edge torn. A woman smiled, her dark hair simply pulled back, her eyes achingly familiar. Charlotte, his mother. Lucas only knew her through that photo and through Aunt Lucy's half-truths, which she always hurried past. "It was an accident, darling. They left us too soon. You were the only one left. I took care of everything. You don't need to suffer." The story was always brief, smothered beneath forced affection and an overpowering perfume, but Lucas never forgot. He always had the same dream, a winding road, rain pelting the windshield, a woman screaming his name, "Matteo!" And then darkness. He'd wake drenched in sweat, gasping, feeling a pain he couldn't name. A name no one used anymore. A name he'd taught himself to ignore, like so many other uncomfortable questions from his past. As a child, he'd pressed his aunt for details. She'd given him cold, evasive answers, then promptly moved him to new schools and whisked him off on long trips. She claimed she was protecting him, said some truths only hurt. And Lucas learned not to ask. He grew up among the elite, in boarding schools, surrounded by numbers. He learned to hold his expression, negotiate with steel, smile with no warmth. Yet the hole kept growing, alongside his fortune. Last week, an interview for a business magazine nearly unraveled. After discussing resilience and strategic vision, the reporter casually asked, "And your family? Who have been the biggest influences in your life?" Lucas froze for 3 seconds. He answered in vague generalities, values learned, discipline instilled. But after that taping, he went home and spent hours staring at Charlotte's photo, unable to meet his own gaze in the mirror. In the mirror, by the way, he saw something no one else did. Exhaustion. Not physical, but existential. His flawlessly shaved face hid a man who hadn't slept well in years. Wealth had never been enough to silence the question haunting his soul. Who am I, really? That night, a charity gala dinner thrown by his company was on the calendar. Something he did for protocol, not compassion. But when he saw his reflection in the elevator's darkened glass, perfect suit, polished shoes, he felt nauseated. At the event, a sea of fake smiles and champagne flutes awaited. He performed the ritual flawlessly, speeches, photos, handshakes. But at one point he slipped away to catch his breath. He found a quiet corner of the ballroom where a photo wall showcased the foundation's beneficiaries, schools, shelters, nursing homes. A small plaque caught his eye. Visit to Santa Ynez Home, March 2024. There was a picture of him surrounded by elderly residents, yet something or someone in the background made him stop. An older woman, her white hair tousled, her gaze distant, stared straight at him as if she knew him. That expression. Lucas took a step back. His heart raced. There was something about that woman. A strange mix of anxiety and curiosity washed over him. The next morning, he called the home's coordinator himself and scheduled a visit. He claimed he wanted to make another donation, but the truth was different. He needed to see that woman up close. For the first time in years, he followed an impulse with no logical justification. Back in the penthouse, before heading out, he slipped Charlotte's photo into the inner pocket of his jacket. As the elevator descended, he felt something shift inside him, as if the polished surface of his life was about to crack, and he desperately wanted it to. The rusty gate of Santa Ynez' home creaked open, revealing a simple, poorly kept garden, benches peeling under the sun. Lucas stepped out of the car without his security detail, dressed in plain clothes. The driver raised an eyebrow. Lucas never made these visits in person. But today, he needed to slip in unnoticed. He needed to watch without being watched. The coordinator greeted him with forced smiles, that blend of excitement and nerves you get when you recognize the name but don't know why someone's suddenly here. "Mr. Montero, it's an honor to have you back. We could arrange a thank you ceremony if you'd like," she said, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "That won't be necessary. I just want to walk around, see the place. Alone, if that's okay," he replied in a calm, almost flat tone. She hesitated, then nodded. Lucas walked down the hall in silence, passing half-open doors and rooms with neatly made beds. The air was thick with disinfectant and mildew. Residents in wheelchairs stared into space, some muttering to themselves, others dozing. Then he stepped into the dining room, and everything changed. Half a dozen seniors were finishing breakfast. A white-haired woman with deep-set eyes slowly turned her head. Her gaze landed on him as though she truly recognized him. Then her cracked lips parted, and she whispered, "Mateo." Lucas froze. That name, his old name, struck him like an ice pick to the ribs. A name buried deep in dreams and scattered memories. A name his aunt used only when she was being sweet, cradling him to sleep. A name no one else knew. He stepped closer. The woman trembled. Her hands on the table were veined and spotted by time. But something in her posture, in her facial features, felt eerily familiar. "I'm sorry, did you say something?" he asked, striving for steady composure. She didn't answer. Her eyes flicked to him again, then vacantly elsewhere, as if her connection had snapped. One of the aides stepped forward. "This is Mrs. Charlotte. She's been with us for years. Her memory drifts in and out, unfortunately. She hardly speaks. It's remarkable she said anything at all." Charlotte. Lucas felt the floor drop beneath him. Too many coincidences. The name, the look, the whisper. Over the next few days, he returned without warning. He brought books, flowers, sometimes just his presence. He spent hours at her side, even when she said nothing. Occasionally, she'd take his hand and murmur disconnected words. Key, lie, Lucy, crying, car. With each word, a piece slipped from the puzzle his aunt had so meticulously assembled over the years. On his 5th visit, he brought the old photograph of his mother, hidden inside his coat. He waited until Charlotte seemed more alert, sitting in the rocking chair in the inner courtyard. "Mrs. Charlotte," he said, extending the photo. "Do you recognize this woman?" Her hands shook as she took the photograph. For a long moment she just stared at it. Tears welled in her eyes. She touched the image with her fingertips, as if trying to feel the woman's skin. Then she whispered, "I was her. I was..." "You're this woman?" Lucas's voice was taut. She didn't answer directly. She began to cry, a silent, held-back sob, as though she were reuniting with something lost long ago, or someone. In that instant, Lucas felt it. Not with logic, but with something deeper, instinctive beyond words. The woman before him was his mother. That night, sleep eluded him. He turned thoughts over like debris from a collapsed house. Charlotte, alive. Charlotte, abandoned in a home. Charlotte, branded crazy while he grew up believing a comforting lie, and Lucy. Charlotte's fractured words echoed in his mind. Lie, car, Lucy, son. The next morning, he called William, his trusted lawyer. I need you to dig up some old family records, he said. Death certificates, accident reports, guardianship papers. And don't say a word to Lucy. Not yet. William found the request odd, but agreed. Lucas knew that if he was right, and every fiber in him screamed that he was, then Lucy had hidden more than a body. She'd hidden an entire life. His life. The obsession was back, stronger than ever. But this time, he would not run from it. He would see it through to the end. The brown envelope lay on the glass table in Lucas's private conference room. Sealed with red tape, it held the first reports from the private investigator he'd discreetly hired. No one knew, not William, not the company directors, and above all, not Lucy. Lucas opened the envelope like one would lift the lid off Pandora's box. Photos, document copies, handwritten notes. Everything was coming into focus, and the picture was grotesque. Charlotte had survived the crash. The detective, Andrew Smith, had dug up old hospital records from a town near where the accident happened. According to those records, an unidentified woman had been admitted with a traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, and partial amnesia. She stayed hospitalized for weeks until a relative came forward, a woman named Lucy Montero. Claiming to be her only living family member, she arranged to transfer the patient to a private nursing home, the first of several institutions where Charlotte would be hidden for over 30 years. Lucas flipped through the files in silence, his jaw clenched. One psychiatric report in the stack stated that Charlotte experienced memory lapses, but was otherwise conscious, coherent, able to recognize faces and speak for herself. That very report, signed by a local physician, had been replaced days later by a new document, with a different name, a different signature, and a different diagnosis. Unfit, chronic confusional psychosis. Forged, Lucas whispered. She forged it. In the margins of Andrew's report, the detective confirmed it. The same hospital registration number, but pages swapped out. The psychiatry clinic's name also matched entries in Montero & Co.'s financial ledgers. The link was unmistakable. Lucy had bought professional silence and commandeered Charlotte's fate. But there was more. Much more. Charlotte's death certificate, recorded 3 weeks after the crash, was the cornerstone of the fraud. Lucas stared at the photocopy. The medical examiner's signature was illegible, and the registry number, when Andrew checked with the clerk's office, didn't exist. It was pure fiction, invented solely to legitimize Charlotte's disappearance and give Lucy full control over her infant nephew. A shiver ran down Lucas's spine. He recalled every time his aunt coldly told him his mother had died instantly, those surgical, emotionless words repeated for decades, safe in the knowledge no one would contest them. But now it was all unraveling. Other documents surfaced, accounting ledgers, property deeds, bank statements that revealed the real destination of the inheritance left by Edward Montero, his presumed father. As Lucas's legal guardian until he came of age, Lucy had moved millions. She'd sold rural estates in Goiás and Minas Gerais. She'd liquidated shares in international corporations bequeathed in the will. Part of that money funded the hotel chain's expansion. Another part simply vanished, funneled into accounts in Luxembourg, the Cayman Islands, and Belize. William, discreetly alerted by Lucas, had already traced some of the funds. Though banks hid behind privacy laws, a few transactions left paper trails. The embezzled sum topped 40 million Brazilian reais. Lucas sank onto the sofa, running his hands over his face. The world spun slowly around him. Every revelation felt like a punch to the gut. Every page, a knife twisting in the same spot. The woman who raised him, who claimed to have sacrificed everything for him, had orchestrated every step. From the crash onward, Lucy had crafted a convenient narrative, erasing any trace of the true story. She turned a tragedy into opportunity. She removed Charlotte from the picture. She created an orphan and inherited by proxy an empire. Lucas sprang to his feet, crossed the room to a bookshelf, and pulled down an old wooden box, his father's things, items he'd never had the courage to open. Inside were old letters, forgotten folders, and a cassette tape labeled Charlotte Voice. Excerpts of a recording. He slipped it into the portable tape player William had provided days earlier. The voice was faint but unmistakable. "Matteo, when you grow up, if you hear this, know that I loved you. I have always loved you. You were my everything. They took me away from you. Don't believe what they tell you." Lucas squeezed his eyes shut. The pain was physical now. His breath came in short gasps. His mother's words, lost to time, had shattered the defenses he'd spent a lifetime building. That tape was more than a message. It was a muffled scream traveling through the years. It was truth fighting to survive. He knew what he had to do. "Enough," he murmured to the empty room. "I'm going to uncover it all. Every piece of this lie will fall." He picked up the phone. "Andrew, I need you to dig into everything about the family's ranch, Las Palmas. There's something there that's still hidden." On the other end, the detective replied without hesitation, "I'm already on my way." The wooden gate creaked as if it were opening for the first time in decades. The faded paint, the overgrown weeds, the shattered windows, everything looked frozen in time. Lucas climbed out of the car slowly, in silence. The air smelled of abandonment and the past. Fazenda Las Palmas. The name sounded almost mythic in his memory. A place he barely recalled, mentioned only a few times by Lucy, always with a note of disdain, as though it were an old burden. But now, after one of his visits to Charlotte, amid whispers and vacant stares, she had murmured, "Las Palmas. They took me there. It started there." Lucas knew he had to go, and he went alone. The main house was locked, but the back door had given way to time. Inside was dark and stifling, thick with dust and cobwebs, furniture draped in sheets, crooked paintings on the walls, the stench of rotting wood. Each footstep echoed like an intrusion, yet he pressed on. He passed through the dining room. There, a broken picture frame still held a family portrait, Edward, Charlotte, and a baby in her arms. Lucas. Charlotte's expression in the photo hit him like a blow. She was smiling with a light in her eyes he had never known. He climbed the stairs slowly. In his parents' old bedroom, only rubble and abandoned boxes remained. One box was full of papers, invoices, medical forms, and at the bottom a red folder labeled R. Montero, Psychological. He opened it. Inside were 2 medical reports. One diagnosed confusion and incapacity, but the other, earlier one signed by a respected specialist, clearly stated, "Patient shows signs of trauma, but is fully capable of making decisions. Monitoring recommended, not involuntary commitment." Lucas knelt right there, resting the papers on the dusty floor. The red pen used to strike out the second report still left ink smudges. Lucy had annulled the genuine document, the only truthful one. Taped to the back of the folder was an old locket. Inside were 2 tiny photos, Charlotte on one side, Edward on the other. On the inner rim was an inscription, "Out of love, until the end." Lucas held the locket with dust-stained hands. For a moment, time stood still. There lay the truth whispering in small details, a love torn away, suffocated, twisted. He left the house and headed toward the tool shed. The smell of old oil and rust filled the air. In one corner lay a large tarp, something underneath, bulky and metallic. He pulled the tarp aside slowly. A car, An old sedan, its side dented as if in a crash. The windshield was shattered. Dried blood stained the passenger seat. It was the crash car, hidden for decades like a secret never meant to be found. Lucas opened the glove compartment. Envelopes, insurance papers, and a folded letter. The handwriting was Charlotte's. "If anything happens to me, please protect my son. Don't trust Lucy." Anger began to rise in Lucas's chest. It was no longer just indignation. It was something deeper, a fury built over years of silence and lies. As he was leaving, he heard footsteps on the courtyard stones. An elderly man, thin, wearing a worn hat, approached with a shuffle. He was a former ranch hand that Andrew, the detective, had tracked down. His name was Leonard. "Mr. Montero?" the man said, respectfully removing his hat. "It's me. I remember the day of the accident. Mrs. Charlotte arrived screaming, desperate. She said the boy had survived, that she needed to be with him. But then, Lucy, she showed up with papers, doctors, the police. She spoke so well, said Charlotte had lost her mind. But I saw her. Mrs. Charlotte was clear-headed. She cried out, 'Let me see my son, take me to him.' Leonard swallowed hard. They forced her away, and then she vanished." Lucas was speechless, his eyes burned. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Who would listen? She was rich, powerful. I was just an employee. And honestly, I was afraid." Lucas glanced back at the shed, now covered again by the tarp. That place, once a home, had become a graveyard of truths. "Thank you for coming, Leonard. This changes everything. She loved you very much. Never forget that." That night, Lucas didn't return to the hotel. He slept in the farmhouse on a makeshift mattress on the living room floor. At dawn, he called William. "Get everything ready. We're filing suit, and I want every cent back, every property, and justice for every lie." On the other end, his lawyer didn't hesitate. "You'll have it." Lucas looked one last time at the old house, now with different eyes. It was no longer just a ruin. It was a proving ground of memories, of resistance. What began as doubt had become certainty. Lucy destroyed a family to build her empire, and he was about to bring it crashing down. The mansion's wooden gate swung open slowly, as if hesitating to admit the person who was about to destroy everything that house symbolized. Lucas stepped out of the car with measured strides. In his hand, he carried a black folder. No security detail, no advance warning. He hadn't come to negotiate. Lucy's mansion was a temple of ostentation. Greek columns, Italian marble, artificial fountains. Everything meticulously maintained, everything shouting wealth. But that day, Lucas saw the decay hiding behind the luxury, the moral filth underneath the gleam. He found Lucy on the veranda, sipping tea like a figure out of an old painting. When she saw him, she smiled. A practiced, calculated gesture, the same smile he'd learned to fear as a child. "Lucas, darling, what a pleasant surprise. Is everything all right?" He didn't answer at once. He set the folder on the table, dragged a chair, and slammed it down as though marking his territory. "We're going to talk. Now." She set her cup aside, her smile flickering for a moment. "Of course. What's the matter?" Lucas opened the folder. He pulled out copies of medical reports, banking documents, certificates, the detective's affidavits, his father's will, and finally, the tape recording of Charlotte's voice. "I went to Fazenda Las Palmas. I found the car, the genuine medical report, my mother's locket, the letter in your handwriting, Lucy, and I spoke with Leonard. He saw it all. He heard my mother screaming for me while you took her away." Her expression froze. Her eyes narrowed. For several seconds she said nothing. "I saved your life," she whispered at last. "You stole my life. You raised me on lies, isolated me from the people who loved me, made decisions for me you had no right to make. You embezzled money, manipulated doctors, destroyed my mother's reputation to take her place. If I hadn't done that, you would have grown up in an orphanage. You'd have had no schooling, no education, no empire. I did what had to be done. I did it for you. No, you did it for you. You craved power. You wanted the fortune, and you used me as your excuse. Lucy rose, trying to regain control. This is ingratitude. Everything you have is thanks to me. Lucas inhaled deeply, restraining his anger. Everything I have was built on a corpse you faked. But it's over. I've filed suit. It's already on record. Fraud, ideological falsehood, breach of trust, concealment of assets, embezzlement. Want me to continue? She went pale. For the first time she seemed truly shaken. You wouldn't do this to me. I'm your family. You never were. You only ever filled the void you carved out from my mother. And now you'll pay for it. He stood, retrieved the folder, and walked away without looking back. Lucy remained on the veranda, motionless, surrounded by an empire beginning to crumble. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, onlookers, company employees, former elite acquaintances. Lucy Montero's downfall had become public spectacle. Lucas sat in the front row beside William. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The evidence was irrefutable. Charlotte's recorded voice, the letter, the former ranch hand's testimony, the original medical files, trace bank transfers, properties sold with forged signatures, even the crash car, now held by forensics, its chassis number confirmed and technical reports in hand. Lucy tried to defend herself with the same charm she had wielded for decades, but her mask had slipped. With each exhibit, with each witness, she shrank in her seat, a mere shadow of her former self. At the second hearing, she resorted to sentimentality. She wept, claimed she'd been under pressure, terrified of losing her nephew, argued she'd believed Charlotte would never recover, but nobody believed her anymore. Finally, the judge was blunt. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, this court finds systematic fraud, falsification of official documents, misappropriation of assets, and manipulation of a minor's custody. I order the immediate return of all misappropriated assets, the freezing of international accounts, and the commencement of criminal proceedings for ideological falsehood and inheritance fraud. Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, not in relief, but in mourning, for the life he could have had, for the childhood stolen from him, for Charlotte. Lucy exited the courthouse surrounded by reporters. No friends appeared, no familiar faces by her side. Once a socialite fixture for decades, she now shuffled away, head down, hidden behind dark glasses and shame. On the drive home, Lucas said nothing. He simply watched the city blur by the car window. William broke the silence. This is the beginning of the end for her. And the start of something for me, Lucas replied firmly. Now it's my turn to rebuild everything, the right way. The police van was already waiting at the side entrance of the courthouse. Lucy walked between 2 officers, handcuffed, head held high, trying to maintain her composure even as camera flashes engulfed her. But just before she passed through the gate that would separate her from the world for a long time, she stopped. She turned slowly, her eyes fixed on Lucas. There was something different in her gaze, a cold, calculated glint, like someone who knows that even in defeat they can still launch one last poisoned arrow. "Lucas," she called, her voice low but firm enough to cut through the wail of sirens and the crowd's noise. He hesitated. Their eyes met for a brief instant. She smiled, then let it drop. "You're not Sergio Montero's son." The silence around them seemed to swallow everything. Even the reporters fell silent for a second. Lucas froze. Her words echoed in his mind like thunder shattering glass. "What did you say?" he murmured, stepping forward. Lucy turned her face, satisfied. The officers pushed her into the vehicle, but the damage was done. Lucas stood there, paralyzed. William reached him seconds later, noticing his expression. What did she say? That I'm not Sergio's son. That my mother had an affair with Robert Salazar. The name fell like lead in the air. William went pale. Salazar? The Salazar? From the International Holdings? Lucas nodded slowly. I need to know. Now. That night, William's office turned into an investigation headquarters. Old documents, birth certificates, baptismal records, newspapers from the era, photos, everything about Charlotte and her life before she met Sergio Montero. And then, in the depths of the past, the truth began to emerge. Robert Salazar, a discreet profile businessman with $1 billion fortune. Years before Charlotte married Sergio, she'd worked as an assistant in one of Salazar's export companies. They had a relationship, confirmed by photos, letters, and a confidentiality agreement found in the company's archives. She was young, from the countryside, smart, charismatic. Salazar got involved, but he was married, and when she became pregnant, he simply disappeared. William explained, showing letters dated nearly 40 years back. So she ended up alone, Lucas said, voice cracking. And Sergio appeared. William nodded. Sergio knew her from their youth. He helped her, took her in, married her. Legally, he adopted you. You've always been a Montero on paper. But Lucas no longer heard him. He paced the office like someone trying to escape an invisible trap. My name, my story, again. Someone pulls the rug out from under me. First they lied that my mother was dead, then that I was being protected, and now this? I don't even know where I came from anymore. William tried to steady him. Sergio raised you, gave you a name. Blood might be different, but love, it's not just blood. It's everything they built around me. I've been used on all sides. He sank into a chair, exhausted. For the first time in weeks, he looked fragile, not angry, but afraid. I wanted justice, and now it feels like I've lost the little I had left of my identity. William moved closer. Maybe this is the missing truth, the final piece. Now you can rebuild based on reality, not lies. Lucas fell silent. He thought of Charlotte, the farm, her fragmented whispers. She never spoke of Salazar, maybe out of shame, or to protect him. Perhaps, deep down, she always wanted him to grow up as a Montero, not as the bastard son of a man who'd ignored him. The next morning, Lucas sent a message. He wanted to see Robert Salazar. He was received in an office lined with law books and bronze sculptures. Salazar, now white-haired, expression impenetrable, voice measured, extended a hand as if he didn't recognize the young man before him. Mr. Montero, how can I help you? I think you know who I am, Lucas said, sitting without invitation. The silence between them was thick as smoke. Lucas set the folder on the desk. He pulled out one of Charlotte's letters, the old photo of them together, and a blood-type confirmation report. The truth always comes out, Mr. Salazar. Late, but it comes out. Salazar read the documents in silence. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to justify. I knew there was that possibility. Your mother sent me letters. I read every one. But at the time, I couldn't get involved. You could have, Lucas interrupted. You just chose not to. The old businessman lowered his eyes. Yes. The moment lasted less than 5 minutes. No scandal, no drama. Just the stark confirmation that he, indeed, had ignored that boy his entire life. As Lucas left, he stopped at the door. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know I know. And with that, he walked away, carrying the bitter satisfaction of laying the final brick in a wall he never wanted to build. The whole truth, raw, painful, but finally whole. The day Charlotte left the home came with no applause. no farewells, just a clear sky, a light breeze, and a respectful silence. Lucas walked her out through the front door, not as a businessman, not as a millionaire, but as a son. She wore a simple floral dress and a straw hat. In her eyes there were still mists of confusion, but also something new: peace. For the first time in many years, Charlotte was headed somewhere that wasn't a prison disguised as an institution. Their new home stood in a rural area near the old Las Palmas farm. Lucas had restored one of the old buildings, turning it into a comfortable house surrounded by trees, wildflowers, and quiet. No marble, no luxury, just room to breathe. 2 caregivers took shifts around the clock. A physical therapist came 3 times a week. An occupational therapist set up memory games, stimulating activities, and read aloud. And Lucas was always there. He insisted on it. At first, Charlotte still drifted into daydreams. She called for people who were long gone. She mixed up the days, but there were moments, brief, luminous, when she looked at him and really saw him. Not the adult, but the boy, her son. "Mateo," she would whisper at times, brushing her fingers across his face as if to confirm he was real. "You came back?" And Lucas, with tears in his eyes, would simply reply, "I'm never leaving." He sold part of his shares in Montero hotels. He didn't need all that. With what remained, he founded a charity to support group homes, neglected psychiatric institutions, and families torn apart by wrongful court decisions. Above all, he wanted to make amends. The elite social circles tried to keep in touch. Dinner invitations, interviews, honors. Lucas declined everyone. He no longer had patience for the veneer of appearances. Gradually, he built a new routine with Charlotte. Every morning they had breakfast together on the porch. He would cut fruit, she would pet the rescue dog from the shelter. Old songs played on the radio. In the afternoons, he read aloud passages from books she loved. In the evenings, they watched black and white films. And sometimes they simply sat in silence, holding hands. One afternoon, while he was brushing her hair, Charlotte looked at him with eyes cloudy but fixed. She touched his forehead and murmured, "You were born with a fever, and you had your father's eyes, but your nose was mine. I used to say you were my little warrior. Do you remember, Mateo?" Lucas said nothing, his throat constricted. He only hugged her tightly. She recognized him, truly. Not always, but often enough. One night it rained. Charlotte woke up agitated. Lucas rushed to her room, fearing a crisis, but found her sitting up in bed, gazing out the window. "Are they coming to take me?" she asked in a weak voice. "No one is ever taking you away. Not again." She smiled. "Then will you sing to me?" Lucas smiled back, and without thinking began humming a lullaby she had whispered in her moments of reverie, the melody he'd first heard in a dream. And now, it was real. Time passed. Charlotte slowly improved. She never became the fully whole woman she once was, but she relearned how to smile. The lapses still came, but the moments of clarity grew. And in those moments, she called for Mateo and laughed and said that God had returned to her what was hers. Lucas changed too. He learned to cook, to grow vegetables, to understand the language of silence. He discovered that love doesn't shout, love cares, love endures. One day, as they watched the sunset together, Charlotte asked, "Are you happy?" He paused before answering. Then, looking toward the horizon, he said, "For the first time, I am." Because there, in that simple country house among flowers, memories, and reconnections, Lucas Montero, or Mateo as she called him, finally understood what it meant to have a family. And he discovered that his identity wasn't a birth certificate, a surname, or the empire he'd inherited. It was his mother's touch. It was real affection. It was a new beginning. Time passed, as it always does, without asking permission, without fanfare. Lucas Montero, now with silver at his temples and calmer eyes, walked down the quiet hallways of a rural school. He wore no suit, just a linen shirt, simple trousers, hands in his pockets. The children ran across the yard, unaware that the man strolling among them owned a fortune beyond measure, or perhaps they did know, but it didn't matter. What mattered was what he was doing with that fortune. In recent years, Lucas had founded and financed more than 30 shelters and care centers. He had redirected Montero Hotel's profits into a permanent social fund. He'd implemented policies to hire at-risk youth from the communities he served. His image had shifted. He was no longer the brilliant heir. He was the man who made amends for his own past by investing in other people's futures. Despite the awards, invitations, and recognitions, Lucas kept a low profile. He preferred his home routine, morning coffee with his mother, and short, late afternoon walks. Charlotte was now more fragile, her hair pure white, her voice soft but still lucid. Sometimes she fell asleep listening to him read his own notes, stories he wrote about everything they had lived, so nothing could ever be lost again. She still called him Mateo, and he never wanted another name. On a cloudy Sunday, Lucas drove to a modest cemetery in the town where his adoptive father, Edward Montero, was buried. The grave was simple, a dark stone marker etched with a name, dates, and a generic inscription. But that day, Lucas brought something extra. He knelt before the headstone, drew a small envelope from his pocket, and placed it beside a white flower. "I know you weren't my biological father, but you raised me. I never lacked anything. Maybe you never said you loved me, but you showed it in every action. And that is what being a father means. Even without knowing, you taught me what true love is." He rose slowly. The wind stirred the leaves, and for a moment he swore he felt an invisible hand upon his shoulder. On the drive home, Charlotte slept on the porch, lulled by the birdsong. Lucas sat beside her, took out a notebook and pen, and wrote the final line of what he called his true legacy. In his mind, he narrated it to himself, and to anyone who might ever hear it. "I spent my life trying to become someone important. I built an empire, an image, an armor, but only when I found my mother again, when I touched the ruins of the past and embraced the pains I tried to forget, did I discover who I truly was. Not a Montero, nor a Salazar, just Mateo, Charlotte's son. And that is all I need to be." He closed the notebook. On the porch, the sun was beginning to set. Charlotte opened her eyes slowly, looked at him, smiled and said, "My boy." And he smiled back, because now, at last, he was home. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.